Today I'll be telling you about Susan Smith, a woman who famously should not have been a mother. When tragedy struck, Susan told authorities a story of kidnapping and drowning, and it garnered national attention. Unfortunately, these stories turned out to be false, and there was no one to blame but her. Let's start at the beginning. Susan was born on September 26, 1971. Her home life was rarely stable. Her parents divorced when she was young, and her mother remarried quickly after. When Susan was 6 years old, her father sadly died by suicide. It seemed that sadness and possible depression ran in Susan's genes because at just 13 years old, she tried to end her life by consuming too much aspirin and Tylenol. She was unsuccessful and spent about a month in the hospital recovering. The man that Susan's mom married, Beverly Russell, was a member of the Christian Coalition, which is an American political interest group that focuses on promoting and strengthening Christianity and family values in American politics and culture. However, when Susan was 16, this good religious man who was in the world trying to promote family values was also a child predator and began taking advantage of her. Susan reported this to her school counselor, who then reported it to the authorities, but charges were never pressed. While in high school, Susan was quite popular. She was voted friendliest female her senior year. Also her senior year, Susan took a job at the Winn-Dixie supermarket as a cashier and quickly became the head cashier and bookkeeper for the market. It was there that Susan began secretly dating two of her coworkers. Now, one of these coworkers was a married man. She got pregnant with his child but terminated it. After the terminated pregnancy, Susan's married lover found out about the other man in her life and he ended the relationship. Susan was heartbroken. She became very depressed about the breakup, and then add that with the family trauma that she had and her emotional instability, she just got worse. In November 1988, after the married man had ended the affair, Susan tried to end her life once more. She used Tylenol and aspirin for the second time, and when it was again unsuccessful, she spent a week at the hospital recovering. Just before Susan had attempted to take her life, she started working with a boy from her high school. David Smith was a stock clerk at Winn-Dixie. They knew each other from school, but weren't close until they began working together. Somewhere between the breakup with the married man and her hospital stay, David and Susan started dating. They dated for about a year before Susan was pregnant with their first child, and so they decided to get married. In 1991, their first son, Michael, was born. Unfortunately, David and Susan's relationship grew rocky, and they decided to separate. But while they separated, they continued to have intimate relations, and about 7 months later, Susan was pregnant with the couple's second son. In 1993, after the birth of their second child, Alexander, David and Susan both accused each other of infidelity, and they got separated for good. Susan had begun working as an executive assistant at a textile company and secretly began dating Tom Finley, the owner's son. While the relationship would now be described as friends with benefits, Susan had developed strong feelings for Tom. She thought that this could be a first chance at her stable home life. Tom, however, did not feel the same way. On October 17, 1994, Susan wrote Tom a letter. In it, she talked about how much his friendship meant to her. She said, "But if we never made love again, my feelings for you would not change because having you as my friend is worth more than sex could ever be worth." The letter she wrote also alluded to something that she had done at a party the weekend prior, and she apologized for it. She kept talking about how much their friendship meant to her and that she appreciated his honesty about how he felt towards her, but she also kept bringing up the future and the possibility of something more between them. That same day, Tom typed a response that he gave to Susan on October 18th. He told her that he had also appreciated her friendship. He had plenty of nice things to say about Susan, but that ultimately they could never be in a relationship because they were too different. They'd grown up differently. He said that she had missed out on her youth because she had children at such an early age. Now, well, he had the desire to make money and go to college. Now, was it just me, or does it sound like Tom is struggling with just a little bit of class warfare here? Tom continued his letter by going into more detail about the weekend prior, saying, "Susan, I'm not mad about what happened this weekend. Actually, I'm very thankful. As I told you, I was starting to let my heart warm up to the idea of us going out and being more than just friends, but seeing you kiss another man put things back into perspective. And as for your relationship with B. Brown, reportedly friend Benji Brown, of course you have to make your own decisions in life, but remember, you have to live with the consequences also. Everyone is held accountable for their actions, and I would hate for people to perceive you as an unreputable person. If you want to catch a nice guy like me one day, you have to act like a nice girl. And you know, nice girls don't sleep with married men. Oh, speak your truth, Tom. But maybe that's a little harsh. The most important sentence in this letter that Tom wrote to Susan was that he knew he didn't want children. He said, "Susan, I could really fall for you, but like I have told you before, there are some things about you that aren't suited for me. And yes, I am speaking about your children." Many people believe that that sentence was what led Susan to do what she did. On October 25th, 1994, Smith reported to the police that she was driving down a dark and deserted street when her vehicle had been carjacked by a black man who drove away with her sons still inside. For 9 days, she made dramatic pleas on national television for their safe return. But as she was questioned more and more, she changed little details of her story. She originally told state police investigator David Caldwell that she'd been riding around in the car singing with her sons, but just earlier had described the boys as fussy that day. She would cry but have no tears. It seemed like Susan was more concerned about how she looked on TV than about finding her children. Many of her friends talked about how Susan kept asking if Tom was coming to see her, which they all found odd for a woman who just had her children gone missing. After 2 days missing, both Susan and David were given polygraph tests that came back inconclusive. The biggest breakthrough of the case was her description of the carjacking location. Now, she had claimed that the traffic light had turned red, causing her to stop at an otherwise empty intersection. However, it was determined that the light would have not turned red for her unless a vehicle was present at the intersecting road. Now, this conflicted with her statement, saying that she didn't see any other cars when the carjacking took place. After 9 days of sticking to her story, 9 days of scrutiny, and 9 days of intense media attention, Susan confessed. There was no carjacker. She had let her car roll into the lake with her sons still strapped in the car seats. Michael was just 3 years old, and Alex was 14 months old. She said that on the night of October 25th, she had driven down the road with her 2 sons in the back seat. She was feeling lonely and suicidal, but instead of driving them all into the lake, like she had originally planned to do, she got out, put the car in neutral, and watched as it rolled into the water. She was able to give authorities the location of the car, and scuba divers found it along with the bodies. The diver that later testified described seeing a small hand pressed against the glass of the car window. On trial, Susan's defense team claimed that she had a dependent personality disorder and severe depression, claiming that her need for a stable relationship with Finley overcame her moral judgment in committing the crime. I don't know. It doesn't really seem like those excuses justify what she did. Her ex-husband David was rightfully beside himself. His testimony about losing his sons brought several jurors to tears. He wanted Susan to have the ultimate punishment. What was happening with Tom Finley? We know that he had a lot of things to say in the letter, so I can't imagine what he must have been feeling and wanting to say when people assumed Susan had taken the lives of her children because of him. Well, Tom's testimony ended up being the most shocking. Not because of Tom and Susan's relationship, but because Tom let everyone know that Susan and her stepfather Beverly were having a secret affair. Oof, that feels like a lot. Okay, stay with me now. Tom stated that his relationship with Susan had started taking confusing turns in the days before October 25th. Susan told him that her ex-husband was tapping her phone and having her followed. She told him that she had an affair with Tom's father, but then later told him that she'd made up the story with the affair with the elder Finley to test his feelings for her. She said that she was considering having an affair with the husband of a good friend of Tom's, and lastly, that she had had an affair with Beverly Russell, who was still a member of the Christian Coalition, and that David Smith was going to publicize it. The jurors took only 2.5 hours to deliberate and convict Susan. She was sentenced to life in prison with the potential for parole after 30 years. Over the last almost 30 years behind bars, Susan has had multiple disciplinary infractions: drug possession, self-mutilation, and sleeping with not one, but 2 prison guards. In 2015, Susan wrote a letter to the state saying, "I'm not the monster society thinks that I am. I'm far from it. Something went very wrong that night. I was not myself." She then said, "I was a good mother and I loved my boys. There was no motive as it was not a planned event. I was not in my right mind." David, her ex-husband and the father of the boys, gave an interview in 2010 saying that he's never fully recovered from the pain. There's always this nagging and gnawing heartache. It's there every day, even if I'm not always conscious of it. Susan has now spent more time behind bars than she's spent as a free woman. She was just 23 when she was convicted of her crime. Now at 50, Susan continues to make headlines. In March of 2022, she spoke about marrying her boyfriend and creating a normal life with him. Since she has the possibility of parole after 30 years, which is in 2024, she believes that when the time comes and she's released, she will be able to marry her new long-distance boyfriend. What an unfortunate story from start to finish. Devastating that she so publicly lied about a kidnapping from a person of color. Unbelievably tragic that Michael and Alex had their lives taken so young. And while I can never condone Susan's actions, her childhood was one that no one should ever have to go through. And I wonder if that ultimately led her to the immense pain that caused her to do what she did. And that's the story of Susan Smith. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching Killer Bites. My name's Danny. We'll see you next time.